Now let's look at the G7 from an Indian lens. Prime Minister Narendra Modi arrived in Italy last night. He was among the few non-G7 leaders to receive an invite, which is not unusual. He's been a regular at G7 summits for a while now. This is Modi's 5th summit in as many years, the 5th in 5 years, and it is India's 11th invite overall. So the industrialized world knows that India is a key player, and they've known it for a while, which is why Modi's invite was only to be expected. This is his first trip after being sworn in as Prime Minister for a third time. He put out a statement about this before he left for Italy. Take a look. He spoke about the India-Italy strategic partnership and his role at the G7 summit. His goal is simple. Modi wants to raise the issues that affect the global south, and this will be a useful platform for that. It's also useful for another reason. India has just had its general election. Modi has returned to power for a third consecutive term. Going for the G7 summit sends a signal to the world that nothing has really changed. It's business as usual when it comes to India. The G7 summit is the perfect place for Prime Minister Modi to make that point. He is participating in the G7 outreach session. Now, this is the session where the non-G7 invitees will take center stage. There are 3 major topics for the outreach session: artificial intelligence, energy, and Africa and the Mediterranean. Now, India has interests in all these matters, and New Delhi is expected to contribute to all the discussions. But the outreach meeting is not the only reason why Prime Minister Modi has gone to Italy. He's taking full advantage of the opportunity to be here to better India's bilateral ties with various nations. Modi is taking part in 5 bilaterals today, with 5 out of the 7 G7 heads of state. He's had bilaterals with 5: Macron, Sunak, Scholz, Kishida and Meloni. A bilateral with Joe Biden fell through because of the packed schedule. The bilateral with Macron came first, the French president.
Great to be here.
The two leaders discussed a host of topics, from defense to artificial intelligence and critical technologies. India wants to strengthen its partnership with France in all these fields. Prime Minister Modi also took the opportunity to wish Macron luck while hosting the upcoming Olympics, not elections. After Macron came Rishi Sunak.
No.
Another big hug, signaling warm ties, and then came the talks. The focus was on trade and defense, with special emphasis on improving cooperation in the defense industry. After this came a meeting with a fellow non-G7 guest, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
इतने व्यस्त समय में भी मेरे चुनाव विजय के लिए आपने फोन किया, मैं आपका हृदय से बहुत आभार व्यक्त करता हूं।
Now, Modi and Zelensky have met before at the previous G7 summit in Japan. And they've had a number of calls over the years to discuss the war in Ukraine. Prime Minister Modi caught up with President Zelensky at the sidelines of this summit too and reiterated India's stance, encouraging a peaceful resolution to the war. Another summit is taking place tomorrow in Switzerland. It's a summit for peace in Ukraine. Prime Minister Modi won't be going, but he has promised Zelensky that he will send a high-level delegation in his stead. The hectic morning was followed by the G7 outreach session that we mentioned. All the world leaders had gathered for this event. They greeted Meloni before taking their place in the hall. During the outreach session, Prime Minister Modi received glowing praise from French President Emmanuel Macron, who lauded the Indian leader's initiative on artificial intelligence as the G20 chair. And now the bilaterals will have resumed by now. Modi will now be meeting the German leader Olaf Scholz, Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, and Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. That is Prime Minister Modi's packed schedule today. Multiple bilaterals with an outreach session squeezed in. But one leader seems to have been snubbed, and that is Canada's Justin Trudeau, which was only to be expected. Trudeau has been instrumental in bringing Indo-Canadian ties to an all-time low because of his appeasement of Khalistanis in Canada. He hasn't stopped shielding the extremists, no matter how many times India has asked. So Modi decided that he did not want to waste time with Trudeau. The Indian Prime Minister had bilaterals with everyone else though, and we'll see the result in the days to come. Fan of Italy's famous cuisine? Well, we are serving it with a side of diplomacy. As the G7 leaders gather in southern Italy, Vantage is taking you to the heart of the action. What's the agenda? Who is invited? And how is Italy preparing for it? Catch the special edition of Vantage throughout this week, only on Firstpost. Fan of Italy's famous cuisine? Well, we are serving it with a side of diplomacy. As G7 leaders gather in southern Italy, Vantage is taking you to the heart of the action. What's the agenda? Who is invited? And how is Italy preparing for it? Catch the special edition of Vantage throughout this week, only on Firstpost.